Hello and welcome to Sound Like. Hello and welcome to Sound Like we are. Oh god, this video is going to be demonetized. In this video, I'm going to be covering my tonal approach to that song that can't be named in the first minute or so in a YouTube video for your own personal benefit. At least that's the aim. Anyway, it's been like 6 months since I made a Muse Sound Like video, so I'm a little out of practice, so let's just go. Throughout the video and my demonstrations, I'll be making reference to my amp simulation rigs that you can find a video to here. It would be quite useful for you to kind of get an idea about where I'm coming from tonally and to get a good basis of the sound that I'm going for, as well as the pedals that I'm stacking on top of it. In my cover for this song, I'm using my Telecaster as the pickup inside it. The P90 has the right sound that I'm looking for. For the recording of this song, I believe that Matt would have been using a guitar with a P90 in it. It just has that P90 tone, and to go a step further, I believe it would have been his 007 Manson, as that is extensively used in recording to this day. If you don't have a guitar with a P90 in it, don't worry about it. It's a relatively minor detail, as live Matt's using a guitar with a PF1 pickup in it, and at the moment that is his mask Manson. In terms of my sound overall for this, I'm using my Vox setup, which is simulating 2 Vox type sounds. It's kind of a very kind of boxy tone and a good contrast against sounds that we're going to be looking at later on. In terms of pedals that I'm using, the first is my MXR Timmy overdrive, with the gain at around 3 o'clock, the treble at 1, and the bass at 11. This gives an overall nice, well-rounded, warm sound to it. A bit of dirt so that it punches through quite well in the mix, but not too overpowering, and contrasts quite well from what we're going to see later on. And the last pedal is my delay pedal, with the focus of trying to create a subtle but kind of well-rounded sound to it. So the level and the feedback are both at around 11 o'clock, and the BPM is just tapped into the song. The overall kind of combination of this is that it creates a bit of an ambience behind it, but not too overpowering, and just kind of creates an additional layer of that warmth to it. Again, heavily contrasted against what we're going to see later on. And with that in mind, this is what that sounds like. Moving on now to the pre-chorus, and we're starting to step things up a little bit. In addition to my Tele, I'm bringing in my XY Manson, as in my cover, I actually double tracked this part of the song. Both guitars are playing through my Boss OS2, but where the differences are is that the Tele is playing it through all the way over on the overdrive sound, and the Manson through the distortion setting. That, coupled with the difference in the pickup type, really helps to kind of define 2 distinct sounds from it. Going a step further, I pan each guitar hard left and right respectively in the mix to create a really wide stereo field. In terms of the amp simulation for them, they're both going through my Orange and Marshall amp setup. Again, it highlights the difference between them, which is just the pickup type and the pedal as the major contributing factors. If you're looking to find something to base your sound off of, you've got a few options. You've got obviously the pickup type, which is either the P90 or the humbucker, overdrive and distortion. So kind of any combination of those that you really want to go for, follow through. But this is kind of my setup for it, and kind of an idealized version of it, because I did a pre-recorded like kind of cover for it. I get that much freedom with it. If you're playing with it live, you do have to make some kind of like choice in the moment. You can't really go wrong with a humbucker and distortion. That's a pretty classic approach and works just fine. Obviously, the advantage that I've got for both playing live and pre-recorded stuff is that I can use my Boss ES8 to take one guitar signal and split it through multiple drives completely isolated from one another to create an overall wider and warmer sound. If you don't have the capabilities of what the Boss ES8 provides, that's not a problem. It's just a nice to have. The main focus is to either basically pick an overdrive or a distortion type sound. It's just whatever you want to choose. The approach that I've got is just because I have these capabilities on my board and I like to get a richer sound as possible. You will have something quite different, but this is just to kind of give you something idea to base your sound off of. For the chorus, I'm still using the same guitars, pedal and amp settings as I was for the pre-chorus. The feel and that continuity still works perfectly. What does change is that I'm bringing in a third guitar track, which is introducing the MXR brown acid and the whammy pedal, and it's this sound that we're going to be focusing on. The signal chain for this takes the guitar signal and splits it in two. One side goes to the Boss OS2 and the other to the brown acid and the whammy pedal. The guitar part for this just plays the root note of the sequence, and pairing that up with the other two guitars which are playing the full power chords really adds to that sonic density as well. And with the introduction of that new sound from the brown acid and the whammy, adds a really distinct sound and contrast from what we heard in the pre-chorus. To go a step further and to sonically separate this new sound from the pre-established one, this guitar part is going through the stadium amp simulation. The bridge section takes the riff sound from the chorus and puts the octave effect through the Boss OS2. So we've now got both drive pedals are being affected by the whammy pedal. It's a very simple approach, but a very significant one nonetheless. It's also why I didn't use this in the chorus, as this is quite a big sound and there's not a lot of things that I could do to make the sound even bigger. So to get the sonic identity across and kind of have the stages grow as the song goes on, that's the kind of compromise I went for, to kind of have that more subdued sound for the chorus, and for this riff part for the bridge is the kind of front and center big dramatic change in the song that putting the whammy effect on both drives gives that really pulled focus and attention on this particular part. Of course, this type of sound is only really possible through something like the Boss ES8. If you don't have that, then you have to choose one type of drive sound to put through the octave effect. I leave that entirely up to you, but you really want to focus on something that's got a lot of bite, grit and power behind it. I just like to give each section of a song its own sonic identity, where it could be something as dramatic as changing all of the pedals, or kind of, as I've done here, just have the whammy effect an additional pedal, just to create that new type of sound, have it evolve and keep it moving and stop it from being stale. It's very simple approaches sometimes you can do with it, but it really does pay off, especially if you are kind of in a studio setup, an environment where you really need to focus on giving each particular part its own sound. It's just something I like to do. In terms of the amp simulation for this part, it's using both the Orange and Marshall sound and the Stadium sound, as the sound overall has to cover a lot of ground and really fill that space, and both approaches from the amp simulation really contrast each other quite well to really thicken out that sound. It's also worth saying that I use this sound for both this particular part and also the bridge after the solo. The only difference being is that for my cover, I double tracked the guitar in the final section, as it's the final part of the song and it ends on that massive crescendo, so any way to kind of get that sound to be as big as possible I will take. In terms of your approach, if you're going to be playing it live, there is absolutely no difference on how you want to approach it. The final sounds we're going to be looking at in this video is for the solo, and for my advice you have one of two options. Though in my cover I actually did both, so if I'm not going to listen to my own advice, why should you? But you know what? It just works.
It's not, I'm not kidding.
Just works.
In terms of the amp simulation for this part, the same as the bridge, it's using the Orange and Marshall sound and the Stadium sound as well. My guitar choice for this part of the song that I went for was my Tele, just because I like that more rawer sound overall, but again, if you don't have a P90 you've got a guitar with a humbucker, go for it. You just want a kind of a strong overall sound. A normal single coil I feel wouldn't quite cut it, but if that's all you've got, that's all you've got. Where I don't take my own advice is in the effects and tracks used, so quite a significant departure from my own advice, I feel. When I play the song in my own time, my signal chain is my prime distortion, Timmy overdrive, phase 90 and my delay. The layering of the drive pedals adds a really biting and breaking tone, then the modulation creates that really nice smooth rising and falling feeling, and then the delay creates a really nice depth and spacious ambience to it that really helps to kind of get that guitar track really coming through the mix quite well. For my cover though, the approach was a little bit different. The drive was just my MXR prime distortion with the driver around 4 o'clock and using the same level of delay as we do in the verse. What I also did was then double track the guitar part for the solo. This time the second guitar was actually going through my fuzz factory with no amp simulation at all. So you get that really raw and sharp sound from the fuzz factory, but because it's a DI guitar with no simulation at all, that brightness comes out even further. So then combining those two guitar parts creates this really quite well rounded off sound. You've got the warmer sounds from the prime distortion, but then that sharpness from the fuzz factory. And because they're two different takes, the subtle differences in the performance, you know, the slightly different timings of everything and so on, creates an even more diverse and richer sound. And on top of that, to my ear, this sounds kind of like what Matt did in the studio. The solo sound itself really has that characteristic open and raw fuzz sound that really I can only really imagine comes through from having a non-amped fuzz pedal. And to go a step further, to my ear, it sounds like what's going on the original recording. That guitar part for it has that really unmistakable DI fuzz sound to it that really helps it cut through the mix really well. That sound or that approach was actually used on the solo for Madness to have that guitar part really come through. It's a completely different environment for that sound as the mix is quite open and minimal instruments are being played. But with that chaotic sound from this song, anything you can do to have that guitar come through as best you can, especially since it's a solo guitar, so you really want it to be front and center. Anything you can do to make it come out, you really do want to do. And a DI fuzz track is going to work out really well. Just if it sounds any good and not like shit. So let's check it out. So those are the sounds that I used for We Are Fucking Fucked. Was it any good or was it useful? Let me know down in the comments below, and while you're there, subscribe. That stuff really does help me out. And what was your favourite part? Was it the bit where I don't follow my own advice? Okay, bye.